Hello and welcome to the first of our two-part webinar series with founder and chief executive of the Langcat, Mark Paulson. My name is Taryn Duncan, and it's my great pleasure to be hosting today's discussion with Mark as we unpack the results of our Adviser Barometer. Before we get started, kindly note that we are in the process of certifying today's webinar for CPD points with the FPI. Once certified, you will receive your CPD certificates via the email that you used to register for today's event. And please also be aware that you will only receive CPD points for the time that you are logged in. The intention for today is to have a conversation with Mark, and so I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen where you will see a Q&A icon that you can submit questions. Please do so throughout the course of today's webinar. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and thank you also to those of you who did submit questions during the registration process. Hopefully you're now familiar with the Adviser Barometer, but just in case you aren't, it is essentially a detailed report containing the results of a survey that we commissioned the Langcat team to do towards the end of last year. Mark and his team were responsible for collecting and analysing the data, as well as putting together the survey questions and writing the fantastic report that we have as a result of it, with some contextual input from Allan Gray here and there. We are going to be posting a link shortly to the Adviser Barometer results in the chat, so if you'd like to follow along, you're welcome to do so and download a copy if you haven't already done so. But now, Mark, welcome, and thank you so much for taking some time to chat to us today.
You're very welcome. Hello from Edinburgh in the UK.
Yes, it's so nice to see your face once again.
It's currently in the UK. Who knows? Long term. It's lovely to see you too. For everybody watching, what you don't know is that Taryn and I have been working quite closely from other ends of the planet on this report for some time, and Taryn is in fact quite sick of the sight of me. So,
Never. Maybe a little bit. No, but I do think that it would be good to give some people some context. So maybe we could start by kind of saying, why did a South African investment platform venture all the way to the UK to ask a lovely Scottish gentleman and his team in Edinburgh to do some research on financial advisors back here in South Africa? Won't you give us a little bit of background on who the Langcat is? Maybe don't tell us why it's called the Langcat. I think that's a story that might take a little bit too much time for today. But maybe tell us a bit about the Langcat and about the state of the Adviser Nation, and kind of why we have been so delighted to work with you on this project.
Well, thank you, and a proper hello to everybody, and thanks for coming in and checking this out. And when you read the barometer, I hope you'll find it interesting. It's really common if you read reports that are about people like you to disagree with a lot of things, and I like that too. That's really good too. Anything that gets you thinking is really super. So I set up and founded and run a company in the UK called the Langcat. We are industry consultants, really, and we also have a PR and communications business that we don't need to talk about today. The thing, I think, Taryn, that brought us to Allan Gray's attention was not my devastating good looks. It was, in fact, a report that we produce and have done for the last 7 years on the UK advice market, which we call State of the Advice Nation. We think, I'm pretty sure, that that's the biggest completely independent survey of financial advisors and planners in the UK. And it's become, I think, a pretty well-used piece of research. Lots of providers take it, and so on and so on. What's different about State of the Advice Nation and what we try to carry into the barometer is that we don't just look at which platform you use or what investment style you like or whatever it may be, those kind of everyday things that they're in there for sure. But what we're much more interested in is attitudinal. How are you feeling as advisors? Where are you going? What are the pressures you're under? What can other people like Allan Gray in this case, or all the providers that we work with over here, what could they do to make things a little bit better? And inside that, I think, is 100 stories, really interesting stories about where firms are, because the world of the advice firm is changing, and that's a global trend, right? So it hits you in South Africa differently to how it hits UK, Australia, the States, Western Europe, all these kind of markets that are relatively similar but have important differences. So there's lots of global stuff in there, and particularly I think it was great fun as we were going through this exercise to compare and contrast UK to South Africa, because one of the things, I mean, I've had the good fortune to come down and visit you guys a little while ago, Taryn, and I was speaking to some advisors and said, you know, the main export of from the UK to South Africa is regulation. We seem to send you an awful lot of it, and not always for the better. So, we can get into that kind of stuff as well.
I
So
don't
that's
know.
me.
I think our regulators have been pretty clever because they watch you guys do it and then they kind of go like, that worked, and then, that one didn't. So then we kind of dodge some of the bullets that you guys.
I hope that's true. I hope that's true. So we're very proud to be a case study for you guys.
Thank you. We
to
appreciate your sacrifice. We'll send some chocolates. All right. Well, look, the barometer itself definitely inspired by SOTAN, or State of the Advice Nation, and we like the idea of creating some kind of snapshot of what's happening in advisors' worlds, and not just kind of preferences or, a lot of things I think tend to focus on the negatives. So what are your challenges? We didn't just want to focus on that. We kind of wanted to say, like, what does your world look like? And hopefully this is something that's been insightful and people have had access to it for a little while now. So hopefully most of the people watching in have already read it. To those of you who haven't, we won't punish you yet. Although in the second webinar, maybe Mark will have something else to say. But look, the thing is 52 pages long, right? Like it's quite a lengthy document. And so we've decided to divide and conquer, hence having 2 separate webinars. And so today we're going to focus kind of just on how advisors are structuring their client propositions and how they're thinking about the investment advice process. Daniel will handle the advice, kind of running the advice business with you in the second webinar. But I thought a nice way of going through client proposition and advice process, or investment advice process, would to kind of follow the journey of an actual client through a typical advice process, and starting with client acquisition. I did want to say, like you've mentioned, there are some pretty fundamental differences between South Africa and the UK that I think are important to note. Most notably is that, like, you've got a lot more, so we call them affluent clients. So people that have got, like a lump sum of money that they can go and invest, or are acquiring, cash as it goes along. If we look at the number of taxpayers in South Africa versus the UK, I think you've got 5 times more taxpayers than us. So good fundamentals to keep in the back of our minds as we're talking. Not everything that we say today will be directly translatable back to South Africa. But that said, what can you tell me about the client acquisition stage of a client's investment journey? So, let's start at the basics. Like, where do advisors find their clients, and how do they kind of market themselves to attract their ideal client?
So in the UK, the fundamental kind of basis of almost all client acquisition is referral. And it's really interesting because most advice firms, other than the very large ones, don't grow very quickly. And that's something people don't talk about very much. They grow in a steady, controlled fashion because each client gets quite a bespoke service. Now, elements of that have been commoditized over time, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that about investment solutions and all that kind of thing. But the act of onboarding a client into what is often a full financial planning kind of experience, that's quite a lot of work. And you can't do it all day, every day, and it's certainly not cookie cutter. So most firms will be relatively satisfied with growing their base at a controlled rate each year. It tends to be when the growth appetite has moved beyond what you can get from referrals that people start doing things like buying leads. So we have a few services in the UK which act as lead generation, and you pay per lead that you get. One is kind of dominant here, called Vouched For. And what you get there is access to leads from a website which puts itself out there with the general public to say, hey, if you're looking for an advisor, if you need some help, come over here. The client puts in some details. I've got £100,000 to invest, or whatever it might be. And then advisors pay for those leads and to match up with that. They often get frustrated very quickly with that. And so you tend to find that really kind of slow, organic style of client acquisition is what works best for the UK. There are a couple of other kind of big differences, Taryn, I guess it's worth talking about, and that's the size of our relative countries. It's kind of much easier for somebody, I think, in one major conurbation in Edinburgh, let's say, to serve somebody in Glasgow or Newcastle or Manchester than it is probably for someone to get on a plane and fly to Joburg from Cape Town or whatever it may be. So we do have those different dynamics. But I'm always struck by how modest the growth aspirations of most firms are. Now, That's for most firms. In our market, there are a number of very large firms now, and they're consolidators, which might be something we come back to. They're totally different kettle of fish. They're very, very, very hungry hippos, and they would like to have lots of new clients all the time. And they're the ones that you see going out and advertising on, the underground in London, or sometimes even doing a little bit of TV and that kind of stuff. The big brands. So we have a kind of two-speed market here.
Okay, yeah, so that's actually not like terribly dissimilar to kind of what we face in South Africa. I think most advisors also growing fairly organically, mostly through word of mouth. And okay, so interesting that there's not like too much of a difference there.
I don't think so, no.
Websites featuring like much in your market, or is it kind of?
I mean, everybody's got one, okay. And most of them are terrible. There's a lot of pictures of happy old people on beaches wearing, beautiful white clothes and looking blissful. What's interesting to me about the way that advisor firms market themselves, or even if they're not, buying marketing in the kind of classic sense, the way Nike does or something, but they're putting themselves out there, they've got a shop window, is how little character there is in most of it. Okay. And we have something like 5,500 advice firms in the UK, and roughly somewhere between 25 and 30,000 advice givers in the UK.
That's massive.
So that's our market. So it's quite a lot, right?
Yeah, no, it's a massive market, yeah.
Right, and everybody can invest money. Everybody can find, a tax structure, a pension or whatever to put money into. Everybody can adhere to regulations, ideally, and so on and so on. So how do you mark yourself out? Well, it's a personal service, right? It's a professional service. So it is the people that you are dealing with that will mark you out. And it is my observation that I think a lot of advisors leave money on the table by not really giving a sense of who they are on their website. So if if any viewers of this were really, really bored and wanted to look at what advisors were doing with their websites in the UK, exactly, all that spare time, you would find a lot of pretty ordinary stuff. And oftentimes, actually, you might find people that have bought templated websites from the same company. And that's pretty obvious pretty fast as well. But I guess it's a function. Maybe it's the same for South Africa. I didn't particularly get the sense of that during the barometer. But there's a sort of, it's not laziness, but it's a sort of rational sense of, listen, we're okay. We run on renewal income. We have a regular source of income because we charge fees on assets held. We know we're not going to try and take on 500 clients this year. We're happy to pick up a few a month, and charge them good fees and all that kind of stuff. So we could put a lot of time and effort into our website, but frankly, we can't be bothered.
And also, would we actually be able to deal with the number of leads it would generate if it did get successful and get traction, So it's a fair point with that organic sort of style of growth and taking things a little bit slower, then there's less need. But it's interesting to hear that things are quite similar to what we face here. One thing, and I'm wondering if this is going to be where we kind of start digressing in terms of what things look like here versus there. Now I've decided I want to engage with your firm. My friend Susie told me that you're such a lovely advisor, and so I'm coming to see you.
I love Susie.
She's so great. What does that kind of first interaction look like? Is it in person? Is it online? Who are they meeting with? And what else is kind of interesting that you can tell us about, discovery meetings with clients?
Oh, wow. It's a great question because there's a lot of variability. There didn't used to be. It used to be very, very standard. But that's pre-pandemic times. So we do find more and more advisors telling us here that their clients are very happy to engage remotely at first. They might want to see the cut of your jib in person at some stage, but oftentimes it's absolutely fine to start the relationship online, which to me is a little bit of a surprise. I would have expected that kind of physical contact, the blood-brain barrier thing to kind of govern things a little bit more. But yes, there's a lot of classic stuff where there's a first appointment, which is at our expense or free. So, book in, come in and see the planner. Is usually always an advice giver or the planner. You'll usually meet the person that you will be working with.
Okay.
The only reason that might not happen is if you're a very, very wealthy client and you're going to have a team of people on you or something like that. So that's the kind of classic thing, and it's a lovely fact find. And either there's a template for the advisor to fill out, or the really good ones now have learned not to use one of those. And they'll let the client see that there's a blank sheet of paper just here, because we're not here to gather facts. We're here to talk about your hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and all those kind of things. So it varies firm by firm, but there's a kind of chemistry meeting, I suppose, as much as fact gathering. So that still happens a lot. There is another model for us now, though, which is I think really exciting, and this I'll give you a sort of quite extreme example of it. But advisors here are using tools which allow clients to self-serve their personal details.
Okay.
So some of them are from back office systems, some of them are from cash flow modeling systems like Voyant or CashCalc, so on. So loads of different things they can use. And I know a number of firms now who, before they even have a Zoom with you or a Teams with you, you will go onto a portal, you'll be sent a password and a login, and you'll serve your own data as far as you possibly can into that. And so that first meeting, which you're still not paying for, nobody's agreed to do anything yet, actually has a little bit more substance to it.
Yes, because you've got some information to kind of like prepare. Yeah.
Dead on. And I think that seems to be quite successful with firms that are doing it. Clearly, it requires some commitment from the client to go and get the stuff out the drawer or whatever it might be. But actually, I've heard from advisors here, that kind of acts almost as like a qualifying mechanism.
I've heard the same. Kind of, if you're not willing to fill this in, then like, should I really be willing to meet with you? Yeah.
Totally. It's worth saying that after that first meeting, most advisors in the UK will continue on to do business with 90% or so of the people that they meet.
Okay, wow.
That's an astonishing stat
that's
to
amazing.
me.
Yeah.
Right?
But it makes sense, though, intuitively, because you've kind of come into this thing and you've said, all right, well, here's the information, which arguably you're going to give in the meeting anyway. And so they're able to prepare and impress you a little bit more. So like it makes sense that you would have a much better hit rate. You've actually answered some of my questions, which is great, because I was going to say to you, like, do you typically charge? Because discovery meetings here in South Africa like tend to be free. And the other big question that I have, which I think is probably we're going to come back to the question of technology quite often, because I do think that tech is also something where you guys are probably a little bit ahead of where we're at, like with the market as big as yours and kind of a lot more demand for it. Your tech is definitely a little bit of ahead. So it's interesting to hear that, like, there are these kinds of systems. I think we've got the same. We've got some of the same here. But a 90% hit rate is that's pretty great.
And that's not just for the guys that do stuff online, by the way. That's generally. You maybe push slightly further into the process to get to that high percentage, but not that far if you're meeting people cold. It's the most remarkably successful client acquisition process. It's incredible. And I think the reason, is this. If we go back in the UK 20 years, let's say, to when I had hair, it was quite common, I think, for clients to shop round. What pension, what's the price of what I'm going to get offered by there, or what insurance will I get, or all that. And so people would maybe shop a little bit more, and it was a much more transactional environment. Now it's not. If you're engaging with an independent financial advisor, stroke financial planner, stroke financial coach, stroke life planner, stroke all the things that these people go by, and you walk in and start having that conversation, it's quite a deep thing. It's not an easy conversation necessarily. It's not just, oh great, I've got £100,000. How much of it should I put in Tesla?
Yeah.
These are oftentimes they can be quite emotional conversations depending on the style of the planner that you go to see. And by the time you've served some data as well, whether you brought it with you or typed it in beforehand, the last thing you're going to do is go and do that again with 3 other firms.
Yeah.
It's like going to 3 tailors and getting completely measured up and then deciding which one to go with. So you tend to go with the first one you see. And we describe a sliding doors moment, if you remember that old film, with, I'm pretty sure it was Gwyneth Paltrow. I'm pretty sure it was Gwyneth Paltrow. Anyway, I just had a little moment there. And the doors open and close, and your future depends, when you walk through. And so we talk about having 2 doors in front of you. I don't know if anybody knows Edinburgh that's watching here, but beautiful old Georgian streets. And there's 2 brass plate offices with lovely big front doors, and one of them is a small, completely independent financial planner who, of course, will sort your tax out and whatever, but will also spend time getting to know you and your family and where you want to go and all that kind of stuff. The other is a big box tied representative of a massive firm who will still try and do the right thing for you. They're not evil, but you'll get, if it's Mark Polson Limited, you'll get the Mark Polson platform, you'll get the Mark Polson fund, we get that's what you'll get. But the main difference, or the main point of that, I guess, is that you will never know what was behind the other door.
Because
you have got no visibility.
Yeah.
Right? And so a huge issue for our market is kind of thematics around substitutability, around transparency, not just of fees, but of what you actually get when you walk through a particular door. And right now, the information kind of asymmetry between advisors and the public, is massive. And so one of the things I think our regulator is looking to do is to try and close that just a little bit.
Okay. I think that we're in a similar situation, actually, but yeah. The one thing that I don't want to touch too much on fees, because I know Daniel's going to speak a lot about fees in the next webinar, but I did, we got asked a couple of questions ahead of time, and thank you to those of you who submitted them. But the one was around discovery meetings, kind of, are you paying for a discovery meeting, which you've answered? And the other one is a question that I wanted to ask. I think we've got a couple of excerpts from the actual Adviser Barometer, and one of the graphs we kind of asked, what are the different sort of models that you use to charge money and or to charge fees to clients, and then how do you think that's going to change over the course of the next couple of years? And if you look at the chart, the one that stands out is on initial fees. So kind of more than half, like I think it's 55% here on the graph, of advisors say that they don't charge any initial fees at the moment. This is in South Africa, obviously, and that they don't plan on having that change. So 0 and still 0, that's what we think it's going to be kind of in the next 5 years. That's different in the UK. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. So pretty much 100% of firms would charge an initial fee in the UK. Yet some of them do that very classic chartered financial planner structure as well, and they actually have 2 different kinds of initial fees that they charge.
Okay.
If anybody's been through the CFP process, you'll know, particularly in the States, that the predominant way of doing it is to charge a planning fee up front, which is usually several $1,000s. In our market, £2,000 to £2,500 is very common. Okay. And then to charge an implementation fee, which is less, usually maybe, I don't know, $1,000, $1,500 in the States. With us, it's more commonly £700 or £800, something like that. And that's the admin cost of bringing your assets across to the firm. And then there's an ongoing charge after that. That implementation one, that's not so commonly used here because clients will buck against it a little bit. But initial fees, whether or not they're charged as a percentage of assets or just a cash amount, are absolutely endemic here. And I guess maybe, Taryn, that speaks to the kind of average affluence point between the markets. There are advisors in the UK who have made really interesting businesses serving clients who don't have high 6 figures to invest. There's an awful lot of people concentrating at people with maybe £500,000 sterling or above. But there are people out there who are making money serving people with £50,000 to £100,000. They tend not to do initial fees because it's disproportionately kind of brutal on those clients who have lower asset sizes.
That's really interesting. I think that we're probably the opposite way around. So I think that actually, like, the bigger the client, the less you'll charge on the initial, and then the smaller the client, you kind of have to cover your costs at the beginning. So
Yeah.
you're charging an initial fee. I think also initial fees have like a bit of a bad rap in South Africa. So you know, we kind of come from the history of commission structures and that sort of thing, and so they've kind of been tied together, I think, a little bit on our side, and so not everyone is as keen.
I mean,
although I think, you
no.
know, it's a little bit different because when we speak about initial fees as a platform, and when we kind of pose the question around initial fees, we're talking about like a percentage of assets, as you were describing, you know, where Allan Gray is going to go and deduct that as the platform and pay it over to the advisor.
Yeah.
But there is also a charging model where people will have like, okay, I charge a fee for a plan, you know, so you come to me and you want a financial plan and I will charge you X thousand rands for that. And then, you know, if you want me to help you implement it, then it'll cost you this. And then if you don't want to be an ongoing client, you don't have to, or if you want to, then you get like a discounted ongoing fee or something along those lines.
Yeah, we saw that in the research, and that, in a sense, is actually you're quite ahead of the lot of UK advisors there. I think sometimes, you know, particularly in some of the chats we've had with South African advisors, there's a perception that South Africa is lagging the UK in terms of progressiveness, I suppose. There's a word we've talked about quite a lot along the journey of producing this report.
We'll talk about it again.
Great, can't wait. But the fee for a plan thing here exists for sure, but there's not that much usage of it. But we've got a tax reason why that's the case, and I actually don't know if that's the case in South Africa. So I'll get educated here. So where in the UK, if the advice you give is in the abstract, it's a plan. It's not linked to transacting regulated products. Then it's you have to charge VAT on it, which is 20%. So the fee is immediately 20% higher. If your plan and the advice you give has even a relatively tangential connection to the maintenance or distribution of regulated products, no VAT.
Okay, interesting.
And it doesn't matter whether it doesn't matter whether the client pays by direct bank transfer or has it deducted from their pot in the same way that you describe. So the method is immaterial. It's the kind of purpose of the advice.
Yeah. Okay. I know. I think I stand to be corrected, but I think ours is you pay VAT if you're a VAT registered vendor in South Africa, and you don't pay VAT if you're not. So so it's quite different. And also it depends on product as well. So but okay, interesting. I think so. Let's move away from. So now we've got a client, we've onboarded them. You know, we kind of like we know who they are. We've got some data on them. We're putting together their portfolio. You know, we start getting to kind of the nitty gritty of putting together like actual investments. But yeah, I think it was 44% of our respondents said that they kind of use bespoke portfolios for their clients, which we understand to mean like you're selecting a fund for a client to kind of suit their specific unique needs. And then 25% using in-house models or white label funds, and then around 22% outsourcing to a DFM. This is the one part of the barometer where we digress massively, because that's not at all what things look like in the UK. So can you maybe just give us the lay of the land of what things look like in the UK, and then we can kind of have like a little bit more of a chat around some of the supporting functionality to that.
Yeah, so the first thing to say is that for almost all firms now, and for almost all clients of those firms is the word I was looking for, the idea of bespoking is completely gone. I wouldn't say it's completely commoditized yet, but we have a very, very strong focus here on consistency of outcome. And so let's pretend that we have an office and I work in Edinburgh, Taryn, and you're in our Birmingham office. You know, it's a shame for you because Edinburgh's much nicer than Birmingham. But apart from that, a client in a similar situation should be able to walk into either office on any given day and get the same outcome, right? The only way that we can do that is to standardize investment solutions. And it's popped up in investment solutions first. So we have many people may know already, we have a concept called a centralized investment proposition here, or a KIP. We also have a centralized retirement proposition. We have a couple of very dominant risk tools in the UK, so they kind of govern a lot of what happens. And so investment managers, whether they're in-house to an advice firm for larger firms, or whether they are from third parties, and I'll come back to that in a wee sec, they tend to manage volatility as much as they do anything else. So you're looking at risk-graded solutions. So a client might use Phonometrica, for example, or eValue, or any one of loads of different risk tools. Taryn Duncan comes out as being a 3 out of 5 risk, or a 5 out of 7, or whatever it is. My 5 portfolio is run by Mark Paulson Financial Consultants Limited, or whatever. So that's what you get. And so the outsourcing behaviors here are really, really developed. So DFMs, discretionary managers, are now making up, I mean, it's got to be the thick end of a half of all the business that's being done, but it's a commoditized version, a model portfolio of their kind of house views, risk banded and made available through investment platforms. And the cost of doing that can be, apart from the underlying OCF of the funds involved, because it's the other thing probably to note is that it's almost all long only mutual funds.
Okay.
Very little exchange traded asset or anything like that inside these. These are pretty vanilla, most of them. So you got the underlying charge of those, but the charge that the portfolio manager makes can be anything from 0 if it's in-house. So somebody, one of the big platforms here makes a really big part of its world is selling its own investment solutions, which actually are very popular and compare quite well actually to other stuff out there. But they've got a 0 explicit charge, up to maybe 0.2, 0.3% a year, and that's just for having access to those portfolios.
Okay, cool. Okay, so quite different, because obviously we're looking at a far more bespoke. And, I don't know if that means that necessarily we're going to follow suit. I do think that multi-managers and, kind of more bespoke things here have made sense given the lay of the land in South Africa with our regulatory sort of environment as well. But all right, so you're not basing your value as a financial advisor on investment outcomes because you're not doing it, you're outsourcing it. So
that's exactly it. Sorry, just to pick up on that, there's a big cohort of firms that are doing exactly what you say. Some do push against it, right? It's a big market. There's always lots of people doing different things. Sure. Worth saying that the manufacturing of investment solutions is something that some advisor firms are trying to take control of themselves, because they think they can get more revenue from that, and that's a reasonable thing if you do it well. I don't think you ever quite had the problems that we had with something that got called here broker funds. And this is an old problem back in the 80s and 90s. But in effect, advisors were parceling up investments, marking them up in price and selling them on, which by itself isn't evil, but some of the stuff that was in these broker funds was pretty bad. Yeah. And a lot of them went horribly wrong. And so there's a kind of instinctive nerviness in the UK market even now. And you'll hear people saying, oh, this is just broker funds 2.0, when people start to manufacture things. So I think our dynamics do differ a little bit here.
Yeah, okay, all right. So it's quite like fundamental to kind of a bit of history there as well.
Yeah, I think
interesting that you said about the profiling tool. I just wanted to touch on the risk profiling tool. So one of the things that we get a lot of questions about is tech integration. And I can feel you smiling on the inside because I know that you're just going to go, yeah, tech integration. People want their systems to be able to speak to each other. You want to be able to kind of say to your risk profiling tool, take that information and put it here somewhere in my CRM. And do the tools do that? Do you kind of your Phonometrica, or what did you say, eval, kind of risk profiling tools integrate into other systems, or are they kind of quite standalone, and then you kind of take those results and do what you need to do with them?
Oh man, how long have you got? So for viewers, if you're interested in the state of integrations and that interoperativity, I suppose, in the UK, if you come to the LANCAT website, there's a report on there somewhere called A Disconnected World and another one called A Fragmented World. And the title of those two papers probably gives you an idea of what's going on here. Yes, there is some integration. People have learned what an API is.
Yes.
The quality and the consistency of them is wildly different. If you gather 100 IFAs, UK IFAs in a room and ask them outside of general service and investment performance, what is the thing that keeps them up at night? they will say the fact that the stuff I use doesn't talk to other stuff that I use. So I am constantly retyping, the obviously chance for errors and all the stuff that goes with that. We describe, Taryn, something called the advisor paradox here that we see when we do research, particularly, individual interviews and conversations and so on. And I think it crops up in the barometer, actually. And it is that the same advisor who in one breath will say, I desperately need everything just to work together, it's killing me. In the next breath will say, well, of course, I pick best of breed of all the tools that are out there. And so,
you want your cake and
which,
eat it, of course.
which would you like,
want,
sunshine? Yeah. Yes, your mammy said you can't have your cake and eat it. And so which would you like? Because, and a really important thing here is that there are kind of tech stacks that advisors can buy into. So instead of picking a system that you like, you just take what you're given. So maybe if you use IntelliFlow in the UK, which is is the biggest CRM in the UK, practice management. They don't like being called a CRM, but back office stroke practice management. Sorry, I don't work for them. Right over them. I know you guys have got a lot of Iris down in SA. We have that too, but only for the very largest firms. Anyway, both of those providers have quite integrated solutions here. So they've got cash flow modeling, they've got risk profiling, they've got investment analytics. Sometimes they've got client portals, they've got lots of the things that you would need. And of course, the main back office stuff that every advisor firm needs to run a practice. But usage isn't universal. People say, well, I don't really like their cash flow modeler. And I don't know why. Is it because the wee red and green bars aren't pretty enough? Or there's an inflation slider that you'd rather be able to control, but you can't on this one rather than that one? So the question that firms here have to grapple with is how much granularity of control am I ready to give up in the pursuit of efficiency? And most firms are not very far down that journey here.
Yeah, I remember you saying actually in one of our chats that I think it's on IntelliFlow that one of the firms that you're aware of that have done it really well is they kind of went and they said, all right, what is their process and how do we change what we do in order to actually make this work? So they changed the way that they do things in order to actually.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. They're I probably better not say names and stuff on here, but they're a great firm. They're very large, and they're a machine, right? They're very successful, and that's exactly what they did. And I think it's a real great case study for smaller firms who don't have 150 advice givers knocking around the country doing business all the time. They maybe just got a few or a dozen or whatever. If these big guys can basically swallow their pride and say, right, doesn't matter what we want to do in terms of process, which isn't the same as advice, in terms of the admin process that goes with this, how does it work best with the systems we've got? Let's do that, because then, there we go. In the same way as, nobody hired a doctor to be a handwriting expert, nobody hired a financial advisor or planner to be an administrator. So, one of the things that I think firms here are learning, maybe SA firms are the same, is to let the world of the administrator do what they do. And we see here increasing professionalization of admin, para-planning as well. So a little bit less of that, I thought, in the barometer in terms of when we looked at, the kind of relative weight of importance of various different roles in businesses. But here, I think the most kind of potentially successful firms are just into removing barriers to swift business and getting things done. Little finish off on this. We've got a new cohort of tech providers coming in as well, and I'm not sure how hard some of these new guys have hit in, but there is stuff on this in the barometers is AI. So now you've got 7 or 8 different packages you use as an advisor, and now there's a 9th one, which is trying to plug
all of those together.
Generative AI in the back of them. And then you've got to make a decision as to which one of those you use, because there's about 40 of them already.
Oh, wow.
And whereas when we that might be an exaggeration. I am prone to that, but it's certainly lots.
Good to know.
Certainly lots. And we did get responses from South African advisors saying that, first of all, they were fascinated by AI. Some of them were starting to use it for marketing and things like that, but it was all ChatGPT, Copilot from Microsoft and that kind of stuff, rather than financial advisor specific AI tools. So a little bit of a difference at this point in time, at least, Henry.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's also one of the bigger differences. It's like the number of providers that you have available to you. Like when you're speaking about the fact that people have got such a massive selection, like the selection in South Africa in our market is just much smaller in terms of like who you can choose to do the various bits. Yeah. But still the frustration exists of wanting the bits to kind of like talk to each other and work together. I think, we'll chat about AI a little bit. I think maybe let's chat about it in the next section. I just want to kind of,
sure.
We've digressed a bit because like we get a little bit excited and then kind of talk about other things. But
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I do the same. So advisors have now outsourced the investment. How are they articulating their value then to clients? So if they're not tying themselves to that, like what are they kind of saying is, why are you here and not with someone else? Like what makes me special?
So the best ones, first of all, are flexible, because some clients do want to know how, the relative performance of European equities versus US equities or whatever it may be. Excuse me. So it's not hard and fast, but I think the most successful advisors now are saying, okay, we created a financial plan. What's the situation? What's your situation? What has changed? Are we all good? What do we need to change, if anything? Are you holding up your side of the bargain? So if you're in accumulation, are you accumulating at the rate that you said you would? So on and so on. And thanks very much. That was a lovely cup of coffee, and off we go. So the fact that the graph points up and to the right is of relatively little importance, and the client should be left with the sense that the value that the advisor has brought is in monitoring and ensuring that everything is sticking within the parameters, within the plan that was agreed in the first place. It's a hard thing to do, right?
Yeah,
I think a lot of firms are on a journey getting better at it all the time. Some people, are well ahead. They do tend to be people with more affluent clients, because I think that's easier to get across to somebody who, has quite complex affairs perhaps, or quite a large portfolio. So there's a lot of work in looking after this. I have to charge you for that. But that touch point, which is so crucial of the annual review or the semi-annual review, that becomes a sort of talisman for the plan, rather than for one about how the investment performance has looked. And one of the reasons for that, actually, is that in many cases, clients are now able to go on and look at their portfolio values and their performance anytime they like. Okay. And advisors have opened that up for clients to do.
So client portals, that kind of thing.
Totally, yeah. And they then spend quite a lot of time trying to convince clients never to look at it. So, you got to question what's going on there. But I think, pretty much all transparency is good. And firms that embrace that probably are doing the right thing. So value is about us as the firm working with you, the client. We're a team together. We're still on your side. We're protecting you from the industry. So if we see things we don't like, we're going to do something about them. We're monitoring your investments. They're doing exactly what we expected them to do within the risk parameters that, we set. Do you remember that conversation where you said you wanted to sleep at night and you didn't want your portfolio to be trampolining? So the fact that, you could have invested in the Magnificent Seven and nothing else and got 30% last year is for the birds, right? It's ridiculous, because that's not what you want. So it's a great way of doing it, but it does take thought and commitment and planning for individuals when they go out to see their clients. But I think, over time, that'll be more. One extra little bit probably to mention, and I think this would be the same for SA advisors as well, is over the last kind of, decade and a half probably, while this new way of working, which is much less product and investment centric, while this has been kind of taking hold, apart from a couple of blips, the the kind of overall economic environment and portfolio performance has been incredibly benign. Incredibly benign. Things have generally performed in line with their risk tolerances.
Yeah.
Graphs have, for the most part, headed up and to the right with occasional drawdowns. And everything else is quite easy when you can point and say, look, you're 10% up on last year, or even 7% up on last year. One of the things that hasn't been tested in the UK market is a sustained adverse economic environment to see whether clients still value and will pay when the graph points down and to the right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're not going to talk about politics, but maybe we'll see something like that coming soon. Who knows?
Could be.
Let's kind of move into the review process. Or into kind of the ongoing advice process. So like you've got a client, they've gone, we've kind of spoken about how do they acquire their clients, how do they kind of onboard their clients, what are those initial meetings like, how do they put them into their portfolios, and now how do they continue to service them? And maybe this is where we can kind of like touch a little bit on AI. We've spoken that you've got lots of tech systems. What is AI kind of being used for that you're seeing from like an ongoing client servicing perspective in UK firms?
So I think there's two kind of buckets. The first is keeping in touch, which is part of the value proposition of firms, I think. And so not every advice firm has good writers in it. Not every firm is a natural, communicator, I guess. And so generative AI for things like client newsletters, keeping in touch type stuff, that's pretty common now. I'm a writer underneath everything else, I can tell when AI is being used, partly because it's so upbeat and cheery all the time.
And it doesn't have your kind of negative, pessimistic undertones, no?
I am Scottish. I mean, come on, it does tend to come with the territory. And no matter how many South Africans we import for our rugby team, we're still quite grumpy. So the South African B team will be running out again very shortly. But that's quite common use.
Okay, so they're kind of writing newsletters, yeah.
Yeah. And that that's important, but not vital. Much more interesting is the creation of review packs and suitability letters. I forget whether they use the same term in essays they do here. My apologies.
Yeah, we don't use suitability, but I mean, it's like I think everybody kind of understands, where you're at. It's like
Statement
a record of advice.
Sure. Yeah. Record of advice. That's right. Sorry, I'd forgotten. In there, a number of firms are really starting to gain some traction, saying, well, listen, if we can read portfolio statements, performance reports, that kind of stuff, if we can get details from your CRM system about other assets a client may hold, so the majority may be on something like the Allan Gray Investment Platform in the UK version of that, but very often a client will have an old pension or another investment that really can't be moved. As long as data is flowing from those providers into the central hub of the CRM or the practice management system, these AI tools are starting to learn how to read that and to generate reports from the back of it untouched by human hand.
Amazing.
And it's not there yet, it's partial, but when you see little chinks of it working in little bits, it's stunning.
Yeah.
Right? It's absolute game changer. It's very, very exciting. So there are a few providers that are kind of getting traction here. I think is it okay to mention them if people want to research them?
Yeah, if people want to go have a look.
So one called Saturn.ai. That's doing really well. A little bit earlier on, but I think very exciting, is a company called Avenir, Avenir. And they're working on suitability reports in particular. And another one, which is a bit bigger, and in with some of the larger firms now, called Aveni, Aveni, not to be confused with Avenir. I really need to have a word with these guys and get them to change their names. Aveni, which actually is based out of Edinburgh. And that's doing a lot of the same things, but it has another thing. And this is, I think this is another really exciting use case for AI, and one that's got global potential, so could easily move from us to you or whatever. And that is looking for signs of problems. Now, those problems could be signs of vulnerability. So if a client's showing signs of impairment, not being able to communicate properly when they're on the phone, or where there might be a compliance problem where an advisor has stepped out of line of what it is that they're meant to do. Now, the use case at the moment is with the big firms because a lot of them are doing stuff on the phone or like this. So what these tools will do is transcribe the call, read the transcript, because they still work on written rather than voice. They will flag bits that they think that the system, the model behind it, thinks might be a problem. It will grade those about how severe that could be. And then somebody in the firm, maybe a risk officer or a compliance person, or maybe just the boss, gets given a report which says, you need to go and look at minute 32 to 34 of that call because there's something here that you might need to know about. So from a
I want to say that it's
management perspective,
that sounds exciting, but also terrifying.
Right?
Yeah. Balancing those two emotions.
But if, for viewers who are running an advice firm.
Yeah. Wow. Game changed.
Right? Your risk environment changes fundamentally because you don't have to worry about 4 eyes on every bit of everything or accept that sampling is bad. Inherently, it misses things.
And do they do they program their sort of risk model into, so they give like the AI tool like a risk model that it needs to study, and then it applies those rules?
Exactly right. There are parameters and weights that they can put on it. Now, again, these things are nascent at the moment, right? They're just getting going. But if I'm a big Nick Cave fan, right? And he's the singer, and he's very, very down.
You've lost me. Sorry.
He did a duet with Kylie once. I mean, does that help? He wrote a really interesting piece about AI and art, and it taking the place of humanity and that kind of stuff. And he wasn't much of a fan. However, I forget who said it. I think it was one of these guru types, and she said, I don't want AI to do the things that I love. I want it to do the things that I hate, so I have time to do the things I love. No advisor firm or provider or anything wants to spend time on that kind of risk management or on tacking together data for suitability letters or records of advice or ongoing annual review packs, that kind of stuff. If you can give that to the machine to do it, as long as a person checks it and is satisfied with it and maybe puts their stamp on it, so they do the front, and say, isn't it great how Scotland beat South Africa again and all that kind of stuff. Awesome, man. The typical, sorry if this is too much detail, but you can tell I'm really into this stuff. It's just this kind of Scottish nerd here on video for ages, being allowed to talk. The typical review pack takes anything in the UK between 5 and 7 hours to produce.
Okay.
Every year for every client. That's nuts.
Yeah, no, that's a huge amount of time. Well, I mean, for all firms here as well, it's like the biggest consumer of time is review documents.
Yeah. And it's non-value added because most clients, frankly, get their pack and put it in a drawer or leave it in their online portal, and they look at the number on the front and maybe the graph, right?
And
that's
maybe
what they
the
do.
previous number, and they can see how it's changed,
Right. So if that's true, and as long as we keep everything fair and decent and legal and honest and truthful, give it to the machines. Let them do it, and then we can have a chat about what's going on. And I give you your pack, and it's beautifully produced, and it feels great, and you feel special because you've got something really nice. But it maybe took 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 1 hour.
And it wasn't a person who had to do it, and then you kind of just have to have a look at it, which you would have had to do anyway. So that's that's a big.
It's a great use case.
Yeah.
Great use case for AI.
And definitely very different to what we've seen here. So I think we did chat to advisors about AI and kind of said, are you using it? I think 9% of the advisors have kind of implemented something, and then there's a couple of people that are in the process. Most people sitting back still at the moment and saying, I'm interested and I'm excited, but haven't really taken steps towards it yet. And most people who have implemented something in the South African market have done something around transcribing client notes to provide, kind of meeting notes and follow-ups. And I've seen some really great ones, particularly when you're in an online meeting and you kind of have this sort of conversation, and then 10, 20 minutes later, you get a pack that says, here are the key points that you discussed, here are the action items that need to take place. That's the first time I saw it, I was really, really impressed. Then I saw one that didn't do the action items, and I was less impressed. But there are amazing opportunities, I think, for this technology to take some of the things off the table that you really, as you say, the things that don't bring you joy, so that you can focus on the things that you do.
That's it. Can I ask you a question?
Oh,
we
no,
haven't rehearsed
that's not part of today's webinar, I'm afraid. Yes.
Okay.
One question.
So here we have a concept. I didn't check this when we were doing the barometer, and I don't know the answer. Here, advisors, if they use a tool, are responsible for the operation of that tool, right? They have to demonstrate, or be able to demonstrate, that they understand fundamentally how that tool works and why it will add to, creating a good outcome for clients. So, for example, if you're using a risk modeler, you need to understand the kind of scientific basis of the risk modeler and to understand that it's appropriate. We've got a kind of open issue here on AI, because even AI firms now, with some of them, don't know how the AI works, because it's become self-aware and it's kind of carrying on, and the singularity is not far off. It's very hard for advisor firms, particularly more thoughtful ones, to say, I do want to plug this in and allow generative AI to come in here, because there will be what's called hallucinations, where the AI just makes it up because it can't get the information. I can't check that in enough granular detail. I can't trust it. Therefore, I can't justify it. Do you have a similar concept for the use of tools?
Yeah, no, we definitely have a similar concept in terms of you being able to, justify the use of the tool and understand the methodology behind it. I don't know if it's as explicit as that, actually. I'd have to go and look. But we definitely don't have anything that's looked kind of into AI as of yet. I mean, we're a couple of steps behind this, and we're also not using it for kind of what you're saying, where you need to be able to stand behind something. But I think intuitively it would make sense that you've got to be able to say, this is right or this is wrong, and I looked at it and I can understand why it's right and why it's wrong.
You've also got that kind of perennial issue with AI of what's happening to the data that you plug into the tool.
Yeah.
Where's it going?
And I think it's so important that advisors understand the usage of the tool and the server kind of usage, and how open and exposed that is, because you've got such sensitive data. Even at Allan Gray, we get monthly reminders from our IT team in terms of the AI usage that we're allowed to have in the building, and that's just people kind of using ChatGPT to write their emails. Don't tell Daniel that that's what I use for mine. Maybe we can carry on talking about this for another hour, and I don't even think we've got that much time. So let's move on a little bit. I wanted to chat to you about client segmentation. So your kind of ongoing review process for clients. Does that look different to what we're doing here? What are the basis on which people are segmenting their clients, and are some people doing something really cool that advisors here could kind of look to implement?
Yeah, there's again, with such a big market, there's a lot of variability in practice, right? But so 3 quick examples. Still, an awful lot of firms segment by value. But by portfolio size, I think that's pretty common in SA as well, from what we saw, and that's understandable. I think that's fine from an internal business perspective, because usually the bigger clients earn you more, and so you've got your gold, silver, bronze clients, or whatever it may be. That's endemic everywhere, right? Every territory we look at, Australia, States, whatever. Over here, as part of our ongoing regulatory kind of onslaught, we've definitely seen firms being pressured to find better ways of segmenting. And a segment needs to sort of stand alone. The clients in it have to have similarities, and they need to be different to other segments. So it's quite an interesting challenge. So a number of firms here have moved to life stage.
Okay.
So accumulator, very, very common now. I've got my accumulation segment. I've got what is sometimes called my to and through segment. And these are people who are, let's say, within 5 years of transitioning from accumulation to living off the money. I refuse to say decumulation because I don't think it's a word, and never should be. And then there are people who are plainly later life. And so that 3 kind of segment thing, that's quite common now. And that works pretty well. But the problem with both of those approaches is that my version of accumulation, and my needs can be radically different to yours. And so we might not be in the same segment really. So some firms, not that many, but some of the really, really kind of, there's just that progressive word again. It makes it sound like other people aren't.
No, forward thinking. Yeah, some of the people that are really thoughtful about the way that they're kind of doing things.
I don't have anything better, so we'll go with that, and it's not meant to do anybody else down, right? Are now coming up with client personas.
Okay.
So saying, look, we've got, let's say, business owners. We've got business owners who are, running away with their business, and most of the money's in the business, so they're not, not wealthy yet, but one day they might sell the business and all that kind of stuff. They probably have quite a lot in common, and one could be 35 years old, one could be 55 years old, one could have a lot of money, one could have less money, but they might actually exhibit quite a lot of the same characteristics. Public servants here, in statutory pension schemes, so all their pension stuff is taken care of over there. They have a very different way of getting paid and all that kind of stuff. So maybe they go in a bucket. And so one particular firm I'm thinking of through in Glasgow has created, I think it's either 7 or 9 client personalities.
That's so cool.
And they work that way. Say, oh, right, you're this kind. And you can do those on job roles, but you can also, and this is to the most exciting one, I think, you can also do it attitudinally. So you can say, well, this is somebody who really wants to be down in the detail of their plan. This is someone who loves the idea that they outperform something or whatever. This person is a worrier. They, they exhibit destructive behaviors. They're on the phone saying, have you sold down my assets yet? Because the news was bad today, and so on. And so, really, really fun firms, I think, are starting to try and do that. And that's a lot of work. And it's never completely successful because people don't fit in buckets really. But as a step towards a different way of thinking, rather than if you're over $500,000, you're a gold client. Super, super interesting.
Yeah, I always used to tell advisors when I used to be a consultant before I did my current job, and I used to say to people, you have to be able to look after my mom and my dad. My mom wants to walk into the meeting with her financial advisor and say, is everything okay? Okay, thanks, can I go now? And my dad would come with spreadsheets and be like, all right, I'm going to use the full hour of time and let's go through everything in detail. And he's got numbers and everything, so kind of being able to apply to both of those people is important.
Absolutely.
Young client proposition. So we're talking about kind of different buckets, like what happens with the young market in the UK? Because, you've got all of these affluent clients, you've got this massive market. What's happening about the people that don't have the money yet?
We're talking about it. Nobody's got it right yet. Yes, right. Yeah, we'll get back to you in a little while. So most advice firms will deal with younger clients who obviously aren't affluent yet. Obviously hoping for wealth transference later in life. One of the really interesting things that goes with that here, I keep saying things are really interesting, it's because I find them interesting. I apologize, audience, you may disagree.
Those people have logged off already, don't stress.
Hey, there we go. Wealth is skipping a generation here. So people in their 70s and 80s have children who are in their 40s and 50s. I know, right? You wouldn't know to look at me. And are looking at them and saying, well, look, you guys have made your way. You're doing all right. My generation is done slightly better than my parents' generation, but my children's generation, in the UK at least, isn't going to do as well as my generation. Just the way demographics work and the way socioeconomics work in the UK. States is the same. And so affluence is hopping me, because I don't need it, and going straight to the kids. So that's quite interesting. So whereas a 50-something guy who runs a business and whatever would be like a classic advisor client, and my kids are too young, but my daughter's will be 18 in a couple of years, an 18-year-old lunatic who doesn't have any money yet, you're not going to spend time on them. You probably should, because when grandpa goes, that's where the money's going. So I think firms are starting to wake up to that. There are definitely moves. There have been successive waves of trying to do this. Nobody's really nailed it yet, to get kind of automated light touch advice propositions.
Yeah, I wanted to say like a robo-advice, and we, it kind of was trialed here. It didn't really pick up.
Same for us, actually. Robo-advice, and I went and visited a lot of these guys, including some of this in the States and Oz and other places, and I found no robots, which was disappointing. But much more importantly, I found no advice. There was no such thing as advice. What there was a desire to sell cleverly constructed baskets of ETFs. And nobody woke up wanting that, right? So the role of an advice process, I think, is still really important. I think that's true for younger clients as well. I think they value that when they get it. They just don't want it in the same way. So the tech isn't quite doing it yet. There's a monstrous load of advice, or there's execution only or direct offer. We've got a big, we call them, D2C, direct customer investing sector in the UK. Huge companies like Interactive Investor and Hargreaves Lansdown, and lots of other ones as well, all online. And that's been there for a long time. So the young ones tend to go there if they're smart. If they're not smart, they watch TikTok and do crypto and all that kind of stuff. And that's a problem here. Scams are a problem here.
Oh, wow.
But the smart guys are working on something that will give an advice journey. But we have one piece missing, and that's a regulatory piece, which allows light touch automated advice to flourish. And the regulator here is currently engaged in something called the Advice Guidance Boundary Review, AGBR, which is looking at this very thing. So we're kind of hopeful that in the next year or two, we'll have a better definition of what a non-toxic but light touch advice process for simple situations could look like.
And then we'll probably have a look at that regulation and thank you for it.
Yeah, take the good bits and miss out the bad bits.
Yeah. No, I think having a framework so that you can kind of understand, because I do think I've heard of some really interesting models here where people are kind of doing, like, we'll do online only, and you kind of pay a combination of like an hourly consulting fee alongside an ongoing advice fee, but then a few people that I've spoken to about it will kind of say, if you're doing an hourly consulting fee only, for example, then like, how do you know that it's advice or not? And like, how do you not get in trouble for that? How are you held accountable for it, or aren't you? Or so there are a lot of question marks, and I think that's kind of having a boundary or a guidance.
There are a few people. Yeah, AGBR. There are a few people, particularly in the States actually, but there's a couple here, or really only a couple, who are doing sort of membership models for younger people. I think that's quite interesting. So on the basis that, all right, you're 24 years old or whatever, you probably won't pay £2,500 or however much in rand for an initial advice piece of work, but you will pay for your gym. You'll pay however much, £60 a month or whatever to be in your gym. You'll pay 12 quid a month for Netflix. You'll pay Life has just become that way. So what if we could give you access to the service for a modest amount per month? And then if you want a lot of time from an individual, you set your parameters about how you want it to work, then you pay on top of that. But you get basic investment management, you get your portal and everything to log into, and it's all done for you as automated as it can be. That brings you into the fold, and then of course upselling, cross-selling and all that kind of stuff can happen. Company in the US that anybody interested in this might like to look at is called the XY Planning Network, XYPN.
I've heard of
and
them.
I think probably globally that's the biggest example of this. Very, very exciting company.
Yeah, they have an online platform that I think made its way to South Africa as well for a little while.
I've never experienced it or anything, but from watching the guys do talks and things, it seems super exciting to me.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, I think we've only actually running out of time. We've got a couple of questions. I think that you've answered this one around competition. Like firms aren't really competing with each other because, kind of like you said, it's really sticky business. People are kind of going with the first person and then sticking there. So it doesn't sound like you're competing for the same clients.
Yeah, I think so. There's a bit of rub around getting clients through the door in the first place.
Sure.
So firms that are putting themselves out there, obviously you're competing for attention in that way. But once they're in, is very, very rare that you're going to lose to a different advisor outside of, I had a fight with them in a car park or something.
Yeah.
True story.
Another time.
Another time.
How do you see things changing in your market in the next 5 years?
Oh, wow. Such a big question. Thank you for asking that, because Taryn's looking at our watch right now. All I'll say is that advisors spent the last 20 years wanting to be in control of everything. And in the UK, at least, now they are. The next question is, what do you want to do with it? And so the biggest trend that I see is advisors starting to run like businesses rather than practices. And that speaks to getting bigger, hiring professional business people to run these businesses, which most firms can't do because it's an expensive thing to do. Sure. Speaks to consolidation and that kind of stuff. So I think the advisors navigating and understanding and wielding the power that they now have, which they didn't used to have. It used to be the providers that were in charge. I think that's the biggest challenge, and the trend will be firms getting their heads around that or not.
Okay, so almost organizational structure changes.
So yeah, you'll see it in propositional stuff
for Daniel, because it's going to be coming up a lot, I think, in our
Yeah. I'll be quiet about it, but there's loads to unpick inside that, and you will see it in client offers and products and all that stuff. It'll filter out.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
That'll be the core of it for sure.
Do you think that's going to be one of the biggest changes? And you think tech, maybe?
I really do.
You think the AI thing is going to be like a big thing over the next 5 years, or?
Yeah. I do. You can't say not. There's a little bit of contrary bit of me wants to say, it'll be like blockchain. We won't. We'll all go to a lot of seminars on it, and it'll be really interesting, and none of us will really understand it. But I think, for AI, I think the use cases are so compelling that, we'll see lots more of that. Excuse me. And then you'll have a two-speed market, won't you? Have people that have learned what to do with it.
Sure.
And those that haven't, and that'll be interesting to see.
Well. And funnily enough, the clients won't have any idea that there's any difference.
None.
I think that's always the fun bit, is that you've kind of got people that are spending so much time on these things, and then people that aren't, and it's like they're completely separate. It's the same in our markets, like people don't overlap that much when it comes to clients, so clients don't know the difference in the experience. But I think it's about efficiency, right? It's about kind of trying to make your proposition as efficient as possible so that you can run the best business and spend time doing the things that you like doing the most.
Absolutely. And to me, the smart firms aren't necessarily the ones that pick one technology over another. It's the ones that arrange things so that they can either, if they're acquisitive and want to grow the business, that they can spend time on that. Or if they are a lifestyle business, as many planning businesses are, and there's nothing wrong with that, that they can have a balance which allows them to turn up every day to meet clients in the right frame of mind and motivated and wanting to do it. And it doesn't, in that sense, it kind of doesn't matter where the support comes from, whether it's from somebody like Allan Gray, or it's something they've paid an independent consultant to do, or whatever else. They know that they've put something together that works for clients and that allows them to be on their game, because if you want a healthy client, you kind of need a healthy advisor, and that seems to me to be a kind of positive thing. Can I just say one of the things from the barometer that really hit me? I know we're wrapping up. It was the level of positivity that we heard from respondents. I write about it in the paper.
Yes.
I've worked with IFAs in the UK and all over the place for a very, very long time, decades and decades, and they're a grumpy bunch, right? Never short of a moan. And of course, we got moans and all that kind of stuff, of course, but they were all very practical moans. For the most part, I was absolutely struck by the level of positivity, constructive thought, willingness to engage with us, which isn't a given. So we were very lucky that Allan Gray Investment Platform supporters took the time to do this, but also, my goodness, for a sector to have that sense of kind of robustness and being set well and looking forward to what's coming next, I thought that was really, really wonderful. Actually, I know I sound a bit kind of about all that kind of stuff,
but
it was properly nice.
No, I think most of the advisors that I engage with, people just like coming to work. They like doing their jobs. They enjoy the sector, and obviously there are things to moan about, and there are things that you kind of aren't going the way that we'd like them to go. But for the most part, I think it's an enjoyable sector, and it does well, right? Like it's a lucrative place to be if you're in kind of the winning seat, which is great. We look through things like COVID, and I know you're going to chat through kind of revenue and the robustness of a business more in the second part of the webinar series. But yeah, they're robust businesses. They're hardy. So you get to come to work, and you get to keep coming to work and not necessarily worry about whether or not your job is going away.
So it's all right. It's better than being down the coal mine or whatever.
We have so many coal mines here. There's one more question that's come through, and then I think I'm just going to wrap things up. But one, and again, we're not focusing on fees in this session, but I do think it's a fair question. Somebody's just said, like, do UK advisors negotiate when it comes to ongoing fees with clients?
No, virtually never. Yeah, if you this is what it costs, take it. What many will do is for much more affluent clients, they will have a kind of tiered structure.
Okay.
So, if I charge 1% for people with 200 grand, I'll maybe charge 0.5% for people with $1 million or something. And one or two have caps as well.
But it's defined.
But it's defined. I think if I had an advisor sitting here with me, they'd be saying the client that tries to chisel you on that isn't a client you want. Send them out the door and get on to the next client. And I guess that's a sign, kind of what you were just saying there, actually, Taryn, is kind of a sign that businesses are doing well enough that they don't have to deal with price-seeking behavior in that kind of way.
Yeah. Also, I mean, the fundamentals, again, we've kind of spoken to it. Like, you've got the affluent client base, so people have also got more clients to fall back on, which I think is handy.
Yeah, the supply is there.
The supply is there, yeah. Okay, amazing. It's been the most wonderful process going through actually doing this, like from getting together and saying, hey, we want to do this thing. We love what you've done with, State of the Advice Nation. Can you help us do something similar in South Africa? And then working with your team throughout. It's been such a pleasure. And so thank you for doing the webinar. I know you're going to do another one, so I can't say bad things about you yet. I really have to just be as encouraging and positive as possible.
I'm used to it. Well, listen, from our part over here, big thanks to you for commissioning it and for making it so easy for us to work with all the people you have relationships with. But the main thanks is due to about 600
595 advisors that participated.
And if you think we weren't so gutted not to get another 5, you're very, very wrong. But 595 advisors spent really quite a lot of time on this, and huge, huge thanks to them. It's been a total privilege to do it.
Yeah, I think if I remember, it was like 19 to 22 minutes was the average amount of time spent. So thank you so much to those of you listening who did contribute to the report. Hopefully we get to do it again sometime. I'm not sure if Mark actually had a full head of hair when we started this process. So we'll have to give him some time to recover. But maybe we get to do it again, and hopefully more people will contribute towards it. But thanks again, Mark, and thanks so much for taking time to speak to us today. It's been really great. Once again, just to those of you who are listening, we will be certifying this webinar for CPD points, so please do look out for your CPD certificates in the coming weeks. And then just a note to say that there is going to be a survey that pops up after this webinar. Please, won't you give us feedback? We'd love to hear if you've enjoyed this content and how we can also improve the content, because there is a second part to it. So if you've got recommendations or things that you'd like to see out of that, please let us know. And don't forget to download a copy of the Adviser Barometer 2024-2025 for your reading leisure. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.